So the biggest question is, where will we go after we died? Do we go to heaven? Do we go to hell? Or there is something else in between? Reincarnation, maybe? Hi guys! Welcome to my channel. I'm Myrna, and in this channel going forward, I'm going to talk to you about some random things that might be bizarre, might be extraordinary, or inspirational too for you. It might give you some new perspectives in life too. So don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned.
Full of spirit.
This is a special plane. It goes in reverse. You don't see a lot of that.
James knows a lot about planes, especially war planes.
To start, today I'm going to talk to you about a reincarnation story. It is about James Leininger. James Leininger was born in April 2000 to Bruce and Andrea Leininger. They lived in the US. So since James was small, he was so too obsessed with airplane stuff. You know, most kids, they're obsessed with this airplane stuff, but James was far away different from them. For instance, once his mother bought him a toy airplane and his mother pointed at something down there on the plane. She told him, "Look at that, James, there was a bomb too." And this James came to his mom and was like, "No mom, it's not a bomb, it's a drop tank." Drop tank? What is a drop tank? Even the mom didn't know what a drop tank was.
Oh, look, there's a bomb on the bottom of it. He said, "That's not a bomb, Mama, that's a drop tank."
A drop tank.
I'd never heard of a drop tank. I didn't know what a drop tank was.
Another situation was when they were watching this History Channel program about World War II, where the Corsair was shooting down the Japanese plane. Then the narrator started to say the down Japanese plane was a Zeros. Then this little James came to them and corrected the narrator by saying that the down Japanese plane is not Zeros, it was Tony's. And the father was like, "What?" Again, shocked again. And then further that he said the Zeros actually a bigger plane than Tony's. So actually it was a Tony's. So the family were going to move from Texas to Louisiana. Before they did, James' father brought him to a museum. It's called a Havana Flight Museum in Texas. When they were there, the parents could not believe how mesmerized James was. Kids would be very excited to go to a plane museum and watching the planes, but James far away too excited. He was walking around the plane, especially this Corsair, as if he was conducting the final check before boarding his aircraft.
Here's James at age 3, going over a plane as if he's doing a pre-flight check.
And after 3 hours in the exhibit, James' father decided to bring James home. But then to that, James didn't want. James refused to go home. He cried and he threw a fit until to stop that his father decided to buy him a videotape. The videotape was about a Navy Blue Angel flight demonstration, which was constantly on in his home. He didn't want to miss a single time to not to watch it. He kept on watching that over and over and over again. Around 2 weeks after his birthday, James started to have a really bad crazy nightmares. He started to scream, the plane is crashing, the plane is on fire, little man cannot get out. And this dream kept recurring 4 to 5 times a week.
Laying on his back, kicking his feet up at the ceiling. And I'd say, "Baby, what were you dreaming about?" He'd say, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out."
This was extremely upsetting nightmares, and the parents were really concerned about this. They were trying to come up with some answers to this. Why these specific dreams always come? Why is this airplane episodes? So actually, James' grandmother came up with this idea about the past life memories. It is believed why kids are experiencing with this past life memory because of they were just born and they were in the transition between past life and present life, so they remembered what actually happened in the past life, and it will start to fade out by the year of 5. So Andrea took her mother's advice about healing James from this past life memory stuff, but then the father was too skeptical. He was really a strong believer of Jesus Christ, and he didn't believe this kind of things happen in our life, so he didn't believe it. So what they did was, when James started to have this nightmare back, they came and asked him questions. It's the questions like, who were in the plane? And to this, James answered, it was me. Who shot your plane? And James answered with a really like, you don't know? It's the Japanese, of course. What plane did you fly? And to this, James answered, it is a Corsair. And also, he could explain how this Corsair was having issues with the landing, and how actually the tires could go flat easily. And it's too much for a 2-year-old kid. It's too specific information that he got on this Corsair. Who told him that? No one.
Who shot your plane? And I'll never forget the look on his face. He went, oh, the Japanese.
So he told his parents that his plane got shot off when he took off the plane from a boat. So when the father asked him what the name of the boat was, and he answered, the Natoma. What? The parents were like, we raised him, we knew what actually he watched every day, and we knew what he was doing every day, and out of nowhere he came with this answer, the Natoma. And what was the interesting part of it? It is true. So there was a boat called the USS Natoma that is in the Pacific Ocean in the World War II. But still, James' father thought this is just coincidence. And this little James would draw pictures of war scenes, featured these propeller planes and a bomb exploding. So whenever he drew this, he would sign James 3 at the bottom of every picture that he drew.
Around this time, James began signing crayon drawings and other artwork, James 3.
So then to that, the father asked him, like, why did you sign this with James 3? And he answered, yes, because I'm James the 3rd. So what another weird thing was, when James played with his G.I. Joe dolls, he would name these G.I. Joe dolls with unusual names like Billy, Leon, and Walter. Those names were never heard of in the family, and none of their friends had those names. And when they asked James, who were they? And he answered, those were friends who were waiting for him in the heaven when he arrived. What? It gave me a chill. It's like 2-year-old kid talking about. If I were the parents, I would be really freaking out. So they were keep pressing, asking questions to this James, and the questions like, do you have any friends in there? And James answered, yes, I did. I had a friend who was a pilot too, and his name was Jack Larson. So it happened that James' father was in the history book club, and he was reading this one book called The Battle of Iwo Jima. So this James came to him, and when he was reading it, there was a picture, a map picture, and James were pointing at that and told his father that this is the place where I was shot off. And the father just went blank. The father could not say any single thing. And since that, the father started to be very curious to find out what actually happened to James and what actually happened that time. So he found this website called the Natoma Bay Association, where actually he got connected to a guy named Leo Pyatt. Leo was actually a radio man on an Avenger fighter plane with the VC-81 squadron. And he didn't tell what actually happened while he was asking some questions to Leo. And then he started asking him questions. The first question was like, is there any Corsair plane in the Natoma? And this Leo answered there was no Corsair in this Natoma boat. And actually he said no. There were only Avengers and Wildcats in the Natoma, and those were the only types that they had in this Natoma. And then he asked, do you guys have missions near the Iwo Jima? And to that he answered, they had 36 missions near there. And also he asked if there was a guy named Jack Larson in the board of Natoma. And he answered, oh yeah, yes, I remember those guys. And there was a guy named Jack Larson on the board. But then he didn't know where actually this Jack Larson is now. He tried to find in the National Archive the list of people who died in the Natoma, but then still he couldn't find it. But then in September 2002, Bruce decided to go to a reunion of the Natoma by association. And there he found that actually this Jack Larson is a real guy who was still alive and he lived in Arkansas. So this Jack Larson told him that actually there was a guy named James Houston Jr. who flew in the Natoma.
On March 3, 1945, he took part in a raid near Iwo Jima. As it happens, Barber's plane was right next to the one flown by James M. Houston Jr.
He was a fighter pilot in the Pacific Ocean during the World War II. He was stationed in the USS Natoma Bay and flew the plane for 5 months before he got shot down in the Natoma Bay. And he got shot in his age of 21 on a special strike missions against the Futamiko Harbor at Chichijima. That actually where exactly he pointed out on the book where he got shot off. And also, it is true that why this James would sign his name as James 3, because he thought that after James Houston Jr. it will be the third James, and yes, he is. But from everything about this Corsair airplane, there was no Corsair airplane in the USS Natoma Bay. Then James insisted that he flew a Corsair. So this one part seems quite not right from the whole story. So James' father was really already in it, so he wanted to take the investigation further. Actually, they tracked his family and they got contacted with a lady named Anne. Her name is Anne Houston Barron, and actually this lady was the sister of James Houston Jr. So when they contacted her, she was quite surprised and she wanted to talk to our little James directly. And then they made several phone calls after that. And from those conversations, Anne just really shocked that actually James knew every single thing that no one in this earth could ever know except James Houston Jr. Such as James Houston Jr. always called Anne as Annie, and James knew it. And no one in the family will call her Annie except James Houston Jr. And also, James told her sister that actually they had another sister called Ruth, and it's true. James told Anne when they were children, they had matching portraits that were done by the same artist. And it was a present given by their mom. And Anne confirmed these statements are all true. So she obviously was so overwhelmed with this. She decided to send James packages. When the packages arrived, they started to open this package, and in one of the package, the first thing that they saw is a picture of James Houston Jr. And guess what? James' picture was James Houston Jr. were standing in front of a Corsair airplane, and it is stated that this Corsair airplane is the most favorite airplane. So no wonder James kept insisting that actually he flew a Corsair. So Bruce did a little bit more digging on this, and he found out that before James joined the Natoma Bay and the VC-81, He was actually a part of a special elite squadron, and it was called the VS-301. This is in 1944, a year exactly before James Houston Jr. died in the Bay. And after that, Bruce was sold, totally sold. And he said that was the one missing piece that he needed to make complete sense.
Real, including a pilot named James Houston. Bruce and Andrea did for James, even traveling to Chichijima for a memorial service at the site of James Houston's plane crash.
And James just got so emotional and just lost it.
But when it was over,
It was cathartic.
We're able to close the loop, especially for James.
And before I end this story, there was one more dramatic situation where actually James told his parents that he picked them as parents when he was a soul in this spirit world. And James had told Bruce and Andrea that he saw them were vacationing in this Royal Hawaiian Hotel in Honolulu. He called this hotel as a Big Pink Hotel, where actually the Royal Hawaiian Hotel was. And this actually happened, really happened. Nobody told James they had this holiday, but he out of nowhere again he said this, and actually it happened 5 weeks before she was pregnant with James. Any idea how actually it happened? Please comment about your opinions and your suggestion in comments. And don't forget to catch up with the next story with me. And I want to tell you that this channel is going to be in English and also in Bahasa version. So Bahasa is Bahasa Indonesia, as I am a native speaker of Bahasa Indonesia. So stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next story. Bye bye.